When I first pulled my moving truck into the quiet, manicured streets of Lakewood Estates, I imagined nothing more dramatic than unpacking boxes. The sparkling lake shimmered under a golden sun. The lawns were perfect, the mailboxes identical, the kind of suburban perfection that looked right out of a catalog. What I didn't realize was that this peaceful neighborhood was about to turn into a battlefield. Within an hour of arriving, flashing red and blue lights filled my driveway. Someone had called 911, accusing me of illegally occupying the home I had just bought. The police came expecting a squatter, but when I handed them the documents showing I owned not only the house, but also all the surrounding parcels of land, the HOA resident who had called the cops went pale. They had, without knowing it, called the police on their new landlord. A new beginning turned sour. The story began months earlier when I found the lake house listing online, a stunning waterfront property priced far below market value. It had been tied up in an old development trust and left unsold for years. The bank had foreclosed, the lots around it were vacant, and no one seemed to notice. I'd been looking for an escape, something quiet, away from city chaos. So I bought it. I didn't even visit before closing. I wanted the surprise of stepping into a new chapter completely fresh. When I finally arrived, the drive down the pine-lined road felt like freedom. The lake glistened through the trees. It was the first time in years I could actually breathe. But the deeper I drove into the neighborhood, the stranger it felt. Every home looked nearly identical. Beige siding, trimmed hedges, flags positioned at perfect symmetry. People peeked out from behind curtains, but didn't wave back. It felt less like a community and more like a place under surveillance. Then came the red golf cart. Victoria Holly, mid-50s, immaculate blazer, sunglasses too large for her face, pulled up and demanded to know what I was doing there. When I told her I'd just bought the house, she responded with frosty disbelief. "That's strange," she said. "All transactions here go through the Lakewood HOA." I explained that the sale was direct, through the county. She frowned, told me not to unload anything until she checked the records, and drove off, leaving a trail of dust and tension behind her. The HOA declares war. That night, I started receiving calls from blocked numbers, demanding that I register with the HOA immediately or face fines. I looked up Lakewood HOA online and discovered something they clearly hadn't. My property wasn't under their jurisdiction. The developers had once planned to extend the HOA around the lake, but the project had collapsed decades ago. My house and 5 adjoining parcels were marked privately owned land, non-HOA. I decided to let them keep believing otherwise, for now. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my mailbox. Notice of violation. Unauthorized move-in. Signed by Victoria Holly herself. I ignored it. But that evening, 3 HOA board members stood at my driveway with clipboards, whispering and taking photos of my truck. They didn't want order. They wanted control. And I was their new challenge. Over the next week, I was bombarded with letters accusing me of violating landscaping rules, parking regulations, and unapproved modifications, all before I'd even unpacked. They even called my handyman, threatening to fine him if he continued working. My once curious neighbors grew cold and distant. Victoria had clearly spread rumors that I was trouble. But instead of reacting, I started documenting everything. Letters, calls, photos, and videos. I had a feeling I'd need proof. Discovering the truth. Late one night, I dug into the county's property records to understand exactly what I owned. That's when the full truth hit me. The lake house was only part of it. I owned 5 empty lots surrounding it, meaning I controlled nearly a third of the land that bordered the entire lake. And none of it was under the HOA's control. I was effectively the HOA's landlord without them even realizing it. But instead of going on the offensive, I waited. I wanted them to overstep, to go so far that the truth would destroy them from within. The 911 call that changed everything. It didn't take long. The following weekend, while I was unloading furniture with a moving crew, Victoria appeared again, phone in hand, snapping photos, muttering angrily. Minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed through the neighborhood. 2 police cars pulled into my driveway. The officer stepped out. "Sir, we've received reports of an unauthorized occupant attempting to break into this residence." Victoria stood nearby, feigning concern. "We have no record of any legal sale," she told the officers. "He's been living here without approval." I handed the officer my folder, deed, title, survey, and foreclosure documents. He flipped through them, nodded, then turned to Victoria. "Ma'am, this property isn't part of your HOA. It's marked as private non-association land." Her jaw dropped. The officers warned her about filing false reports, then left. The crowd of neighbors who had gathered dispersed in awkward silence. Victoria, humiliated, climbed back into her golf cart and drove off without a word. She had tried to ruin my reputation, but instead, she'd exposed her own ignorance, turning the tables. The next morning, I received a call from the HOA's legal representative, claiming they still had oversight for the sake of community standards. I let him finish, thanked him, and hung up. Then I opened my laptop. I had everything I needed: letters, video footage, and police reports. But as I reviewed the survey maps again, I made a discovery even more devastating for them. Their clubhouse, walking trail, and dock were partially built on my land. Legally, the HOA was trespassing. So, I called my lawyer. Together, we drafted a notice of encroachment and unauthorized use of private property. It demanded the HOA cease all activity on my parcels immediately or face eviction and legal damages. At 10 a.m. the next day, I hand-delivered copies to the HOA office. By noon, Victoria sent a frantic email filled with accusations and capital letters. I didn't reply. I simply sent her the official property maps highlighting her mistake. An hour later, she raced to the county office to confirm it. By week's end, the truth spread like wildfire. The HOA's prized facilities were sitting on land they didn't own. Every party they'd hosted, every fee they'd collected, all of it had taken place on property belonging to me. Legally, I could evict them. The courtroom reckoning. A few days later, Victoria demanded a meeting. I agreed, at the courthouse, with my attorney present. The hearing was quiet but brutal. My lawyer presented the deeds and surveys. The county registrar confirmed my ownership of all disputed parcels. Victoria's lawyer argued technicalities, but the evidence was overwhelming. The final ruling was decisive. The HOA must vacate all structures on my land within 30 days. They must issue a public apology acknowledging their mistake. They would lose all rights to the facilities they have been operating illegally. When the decision was read, Victoria sat frozen, her empire dismantled in a single morning. Within days, workers began dismantling the community dock and locking up the clubhouse. The once proud Lakewood HOA was powerless. Their funds dried up, their members scattered, and their authority evaporated. I rebuilt the dock privately, adding a new sign at the entrance. Private property, access by owner invitation only. It was a quiet, poetic reminder that power built on arrogance never lasts. Resolution and aftermath. Once the dust settled, the silence that filled the lake wasn't hostile anymore. It was peaceful. The HOA's collapse was more than revenge. It was justice. The neighbors who once glared now stopped by with smiles and apologies. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, people started living freely again, hanging Christmas lights, painting shutters, and hosting barbecues without fear of violations. One elderly couple told me they'd been fined every time their flag faded. Another said she'd been written up for having too many flower pots. For years, Victoria had weaponized rules to control everyone around her. Now that control was gone. But the story didn't quite end there. A month later, I received one last letter, this time from Victoria's attorney, accusing me of defamation and damage to community standing. My lawyer laughed out loud. We not only got the claim dismissed, but we countersued for harassment, false reporting, and misuse of emergency services. The court awarded me $75,000 in damages. When I received the check, I didn't feel anger or vengeance, just closure. The kind of peace that comes from watching justice unfold naturally without needing to raise your voice. A few weeks later, another envelope arrived, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single line. Congratulations, you won. I hope you're happy. It didn't need a signature. I knew it was from Victoria. I folded it neatly, placed it in the same folder that started all this, and walked to the dock. The lake shimmered under the sunset, calm, mine, and finally free. The lesson. In the end, I realized something powerful. True strength doesn't come from confrontation, but from patience. The HOA tried to intimidate me with fake rules, fines, and threats. But the law and truth stood quietly on my side the whole time. Victoria's downfall wasn't about one man fighting back. It was about exposing the fragility of false power. She built her authority on fear and paperwork. I dismantled it with real paperwork, deeds, surveys, and facts. By summer, Lakewood Estates no longer had an HOA. The sign at the neighborhood entrance was removed, leaving only 2 screw holes where it once hung. The community learned what freedom felt like again, and I finally had everything I came for: peace, water, and silence. But above all, I had something even better: proof that you can't bully someone who owns the ground you're standing on.